Hello students and welcome to chapter 4, where we will discuss carbohydrates, which include sugars, starches, and fibers. Your brain needs carbohydrates to power its activities. Some questions you can ask yourself are, what are your go-to snacks when studying for exams, or when you go to the gym? And why are some better for you than others? The main energy source that our body uses, or particularly our cells use, is glucose, a monosaccharide. We will discuss the different categories of carbohydrates, their chemical structure, and also we will go over the digestion and absorption of carbs. Moreover, we will also go over how the body maintains its blood glucose and what happens when the blood glucose rises or falls too low. We will also describe how added sugars can contribute to health problems and identify the health benefits of starches and fibers. Firstly, let's go over the chemical structure of dietary carbs. A single sugar is called a monosaccharide. And that prefix right there, mono, is probably going to give that away. The root word saccharide means sugar. A disaccharide is when two monosaccharides are going to pair up together, combined through a bond. A polysaccharide is when more than two or several monosaccharides are going to link together to form a chain of monosaccharides. The four main elements that we find in carbohydrates are going to be hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon. And as you can see onto the right here, we have an example. The brain uses carbohydrates as its primary energy source, and in particular, it uses glucose, which is a monosaccharide. Muscle stores simple sugars in the form of glycogen, and excess sugars are stored as fat. So first, let's go over monosaccharides. They have the same numbers and kinds of atoms, and they differ in sweetness depending on their structure. Glucose is the essential energy source for our cells, and glucose is going to determine our blood sugar. It is part of every disaccharide. Fructose is a monosaccharide that is the sweetest of the sugars. And galactose is a monosaccharide that's found in only a few foods, such as milk. Galactose and glucose are going to link together to form lactose, which is a disaccharide. So here is the chemical structure of glucose. It kind of looks like a hexagonal shape, and you can see how there are different ways of drawing it. So the first way right here, we see that they've included every element or atom. And on the right-hand side, we can see that they did not include the C's on the edges right here, just to save time. But what you will notice is that glucose has 6 carbons. And these carbons are going to be numbered from the right to the left, from 1 through 6. So for example, this is carbon number 1, carbon number 2, carbon number 3, 4, 5, and 6. So on paper, the structure of glucose has to be drawn flat, but in nature, the 5 carbons and oxygen are roughly in a plane. Here are examples of other monosaccharides, such as fructose and galactose. We can see that they pretty much look identical, but they have a few differences. For example, for glucose and galactose, the hydroxyl group is just flipped, which is going to cause them to have different properties or characteristics. And fructose looks more like a pentagonal shape versus a hexagonal shape for glucose and galactose. And also you might notice different groups of atoms in different arrangements. In reflection 2, we will match the different sugars with which category they fit under, whether they're a monosaccharide, a polysaccharide, or a disaccharide. And if we go ahead onto the solutions, we see that complex carbohydrates are also called polysaccharides. Sucrose is a disaccharide. Galactose is a monosaccharide. Lactose is a disaccharide as well. Fructose is a monosaccharide. Maltose is a disaccharide, and glucose is a monosaccharide. So what are the disaccharides made out of? Let's go over that. So sucrose is made out of a glucose plus a fructose. And sucrose is probably what you think about when you eat sugar or when you see sugar in a container. Sucrose is basically table sugar. Next, when we look at lactose, which is the sugar found in milk, it's also a disaccharide. So lactose is composed of glucose and a galactose monosaccharide. And maltose is also a disaccharide that's found in, for example, bread, wheat, whole wheat, those kinds of foods. So maltose is going to be a glucose bonded to another glucose. So these are your disaccharides. And then we have our monosaccharides here, and we can combine them together with glucose to form different disaccharides. It's important to also know synonyms for polysaccharides and monosaccharides. So often complex carbohydrates are called complex sugars. So polysaccharides are called complex sugars. And complex sugars are usually better for you because it's not going to raise your blood glucose extremely. So it's going to prevent huge dips and huge increases in your blood sugar. It helps to control it. Monosaccharides are associated with or called simple sugars. And simple sugars are going to often cause, especially if you eat processed food, is going to cause a lot of dips and a lot of peaks when it comes to blood sugar. Okay, so we kind of talked about the disaccharides and what they're composed of. So again, maltose is when two glucoses are combined. Sucrose is when a glucose and a fructose are combined, and lactose is when galactose and glucose is combined. But how do we link them up together? We link them up together through a chemical reaction called a condensation reaction, where we combine two monosaccharides together. Now, this is not only for sugars, but also for the other macromolecules, the other energy yielding nutrients, such as proteins and also lipids. To make it simpler for you, condensation reactions are going to be when we remove water in order to create a bond. And hydrolysis is the exact opposite. This is where we add water to break a bond. So when you have a bigger sugar and you want to break it apart into its separate monosaccharides, you have to add water through a chemical reaction called hydrolysis. So here's an example of the hydrolysis of a disaccharide. So we first have a bond between the two monosaccharides right here. One monosaccharide and our second monosaccharide, and in between we have a bond called a glycosidic linkage. So this is the bond that holds together sugars. And if we want to break apart that glycosidic linkage, we have to add water to it. So water has to attack that bond. And as a result, if you look on the right-hand side, after the chemical reaction, now the two monosaccharides are separated and the bond is no more. So again, when we add water, it's going to break that bond between the two sugars. And this is called a hydrolysis reaction. In the next slide, we see different examples of polysaccharides. And each of those little blue dots is going to represent a glucose monosaccharide. And you probably notice right now, there's a bunch of those glucose monosaccharides linked together. So polysaccharides have hundreds or even thousands of monosaccharides that are connected to each other. And also there are going to be different categories of polysaccharides. So glycogen is the polysaccharide in animals and humans. When we have too much glucose that we no longer need to use, we need to store that excess glucose in the form of glycogen. On the flip side, for plants, they have a polysaccharide called starch that is going to be their storage polysaccharide. So when plants have too much glucose that they no longer need to use, they store it in the form of starch. So these two types of polysaccharides are called storage polysaccharides. So storage polysaccharides include, well, the most common examples include glycogen for animals and humans, and starch for plants. And if you look at starch, there's actually two different types of starch. We have amylopectin and amylose. And they're different because most notably their shape is different. So amylopectin is going to be branched, and amylose is going to be unbranched. So as you can see right here, amylopectin has several branches. But for amylose, it kind of looks like a straight chain that's kind of looping. Reflection 3. Glycogen and starch are examples of storage polysaccharides. And we can go on to the solutions. So let's go to the next slide. And the next question is, glycogen is the storage form of energy in animals. Starch is the storage form of energy in plants. If starch is highly branched, it is called amylopectin. If starch is unbranched, it is called amylose. So make sure to remember the difference between glycogen and starch and in which organisms they are found in. Glycogen for animals, starch for plants. Next, we will discuss dietary fibers. Fibers are also going to be categorized as carbohydrates. So fibers are technically sugars as well. However, for humans, we are not able to digest fibers completely, like other herbivores such as cows. And because of this, fiber has different benefits for our digestive system. And most of this fiber actually comes from the structural parts of plants that we cannot digest. For example, cellulose is a polysaccharide in plants that humans cannot digest because they lack the enzyme cellulase to digest cellulose. There are two types of fibers. We have soluble fiber and insoluble fiber, which have different benefits. Next, we will discuss the digestion and absorption of carbohydrates. Carbohydrate digestion starts in the mouth, where your saliva is going to contain an enzyme called amylase, which breaks down starch into glucose. And carbohydrates are also digested in the stomach, in the small intestine, and also in the large intestine, where each part of the digestive system has enzymes that are going to further break down the sugars. So where are carbohydrates absorbed? Like any other of the nutrients, carbohydrates are going to be absorbed in the small intestine. And we talked about how the small intestine has these structures called villi, which are going to absorb the nutrients and transport it into your bloodstream through the capillaries. And now you can see that the sugars, in this case, are going to transport to the liver, and in the liver, galactose and fructose share metabolic pathways with glucose. And glucose is used by most cells in the body for energy. So the cells in your body, they prefer glucose over anything else to use for energy. That is something important to know as well. Knowledge check 1. Which of the following takes place in the large intestine? A, B, C, or D? And the correct answer is C, fiber attracting water. So the majority of carbohydrate digestion and absorption in the presence of maltase, sucrase, and lactase, so all of these are enzymes that break down those sugars, and pancreatic amylase all take place in the small intestine. So in the large intestine, fiber in your stool is going to attract water, which is going to improve the passing of your stools. But the majority of carbohydrate digestion, the breakdown of sugars, is going to occur in your small intestine. Discussion 1. Describe the digestion process for carbohydrates and how it increases one's feeling of fullness and satiety. So the ultimate goal of carbohydrate digestion is the absorption of glucose, which is the preferred energy source for our body cells. Remember that sugars begin to digest in the mouth through the saliva, which contains the enzyme amylase, which breaks down starch. The activity of the enzyme diminishes in the stomach due to the stomach acid, and if fiber is present in the stomach, it delays gastric emptying. So fiber makes a person feel fuller and prevents other problems such as overeating. Next, we will discuss lactose intolerance. Lactose intolerance is the inability to digest the sugar in milk called lactose. And as we saw earlier, lactose is a disaccharide composed of glucose and galactose. So this is going to result in a bunch of symptoms such as bloating, gas, abdominal discomfort, and diarrhea. And it differs from milk allergies, which is caused by your immune system instead of the inability to digest. So individuals who are lactose intolerant, they lack the enzyme called lactase, which is going to break down lactose. And this is usually due to just a genetic difference. So let's discuss glucose and its primary role in the carbohydrate metabolism. When we have too much glucose, as we discussed, we store it in the form of a polysaccharide called glycogen. And glycogen likes to hold water. Interestingly, we can also make glucose from proteins. When we make glucose from a non-glucose source, such as proteins, this is called gluconeogenesis. When we don't have enough glucose in our body because of our diet, for example, if we're on a low-carb diet, a keto diet, what happens is that our body starts to break down fats, and that produces something called ketone bodies. And ketone bodies are going to be used by our bodies as an alternative energy source, especially for our brains. However, ketone bodies are acidic, and they can lead to a condition called ketosis, which makes our blood acidic, which is not good. Reflection 4. Match the ways the body uses glucose for energy. And here are the solutions. Condensation, like we saw earlier, is when water is removed in order to combine sugars together to form a bigger sugar. So for example, when we have too much glucose, the glucose will go through a condensation reaction to form a glycogen. And speaking of glucose, glucose is the preferred source of energy for the brain, for the nerve cells. And not only even for the brain, but for most cells in your body. Hydrolysis is the opposite of condensation. This is where we add water to break down a bigger sugar, such as glycogen, into smaller sugars, into glucose. So remember, add water and condensation is remove water. And your liver is actually really important because it stores 1/3 of the glycogen in the body. The other 2/3 of glycogen is going to be stored in your muscles. And this is important, and this was designed that way because muscles need a lot of energy. And so when we're running out of energy, our muscles are running out of energy, it's good to have that extra glycogen so that the muscles have an immediate energy source. Next, let's discuss blood glucose levels. The main organ and also gland that's going to regulate your blood glucose is the pancreas. And the pancreas is going to secrete two hormones, insulin and glucagon. Insulin is going to lower blood glucose, and glucagon is going to raise blood glucose. But how does insulin exactly lower the sugar in your blood? It lowers the sugar in your blood by moving the sugar, glucose, from your blood into the cells of your body. And for glucagon, how does it raise blood glucose? It does this by breaking down glycogen from the liver and releasing it back into your blood. Next, we will discuss the normal ranges of blood sugar and deviations from that. So diabetes is going to be a condition where we have too high of a blood sugar. The difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes is genetic versus environmental. So type 1 diabetes is due to a genetic condition where the body's own immune system is going to attack the pancreas, which prevents it from producing insulin. Type 2 diabetes is caused by one's diet. When they consume too much food and too much sugar, it causes a high blood glucose level. And the high amount of sugar in one's blood can be toxic. It goes to the pancreas and damages the pancreas, which results in the underproduction of insulin. So both types of diabetes really are going to result in the pancreas being unable to create insulin. And that's the inadequate part of insulin in diabetes. But also there's something called insulin resistance in diabetes patients, where the cells are no longer able to be sensitive and respond to insulin as it should, which ultimately results in a higher blood sugar. Hypoglycemia is the opposite. This is low blood sugar. And we can definitely infer what that means by the prefix hypo, which means under. Which food will help improve aspects of health because of their low glycemic response? And this really just comes from your readings. So a low glycemic response is going to be a response that doesn't peak your blood sugar. And these are going to come from foods that have complex carbohydrates. And we talked about how complex carbs are also polysaccharides. So candy is definitely not a complex carb. Fruits have a lot of simple sugars, not complex sugars. White rice has a lot of simple sugars. But on the other hand, corn tortillas, they have a lot of complex sugars, polysaccharides. So your answer is corn tortillas. Corn tortillas, apples, and rolled oats are examples of foods with a low glycemic response. It's not going to change your blood sugar erratically in either direction. It's going to help you maintain a steady blood sugar. So what are the health effects and recommended intakes of sugars? Health effects of sugar. So of course, in moderate amounts, sugar is pleasurable, but unfortunately in America and other parts of the world, sugar is overconsumed, which leads to obesity and chronic diseases such as diabetes. Also, there's going to be a disproportionately large amount of sugar and fats in processed foods, and that leads to nutrient deficiencies and a unhealthy amount of energy, caloric excess in individuals. Another downside of too much sugar in one's diet is dental caries, aka dental cavities. This is where the bacteria ferment the sugars in your teeth and produce acid, which erodes the tooth enamel. Sugary foods are associated with tooth decay, and over time, it's going to result in tooth loss and more cavities. And it's recommended to use toothpaste with fluoride, which prevent and repair these cavities. I like to use a toothpaste called Sensodyne. I'm not being paid or anything, but Sensodyne is a good option for a toothpaste with fluoride. Okay. So next, knowledge check 2. The dietary guidelines for Americans urge consumers to limit intake of added sugars to 10% of total kilocalories per day. So going beyond that is over-consuming the daily value for sugars. Artificial sweeteners can be a good thing, especially for people with diabetes. It's not going to cause erratic changes in your blood sugar. It's not going to raise your blood sugar because artificial sweeteners are not the same as glucose. They're non-nutritive, but large doses can have adverse effects. You might have heard that these artificial sweeteners, they can actually change your gut microbiome, meaning the healthy bacteria inside of your digestive system, your GI tract. And that's bad because the good bacteria in your digestive system is important for creating important vitamins and for digestion as well. Next, we will discuss the health effects and recommended intakes of starch and fibers. So fibers are always good when they're part of your diet because they help promote satiety, which means a feeling of fullness, and as a result, it's going to prevent overeating. And because that prevents overeating, it's going to prevent being overweight and then being obese, which can prevent a plethora of other diseases such as hypertension and diabetes. So eating fiber is going to prevent a lot of heart diseases as a result. Okay, high fiber foods are going to help a person with diabetes. It's going to promote GI health. Remember, GI means gastrointestinal. And like I mentioned earlier, it helps with weight management, which is going to result in the prevention of these other diseases or improvement. Okay, rarely, having too much fiber in your diet can cause other problems, such as insufficient energy or nutrients, abdominal discomfort, gas, diarrhea, a GI obstruction, nutrient absorption problems. So there are downsides to excessive fiber, but it's rare. Usually having more fiber in your diet is a good thing. And a lot of that fiber comes from vegetables and whole grains. Discussion 2. Identify ways in which fiber can help with health issues, including diabetes, colon cancer, heart disease, and gut health. And we've kind of discussed that as we went through our previous slides. Fiber promoting fullness is going to prevent being overweight, which is going to prevent several of these other diseases. So here are some of the reasons how fiber is going to aid in the prevention or improvement of these other diseases. And here's a chart going over the two different types of fiber. We have soluble fiber and insoluble fiber, and their respective benefits in your body. So insoluble fiber, often it's known for improving the weight of your stools, adding more weight to your stools in order for your stools to pass better, avoid constipation. Soluble fibers can do that as well by making your stools more gel-like. Also, soluble fibers are going to have the benefits listed here. These can kind of cross between one another, so that's good to know. And next we have the recommended intakes of starch and fibers. The DRI for carbohydrates is 45 to 65% of energy requirements, the AMDR. RDA for carbs is 130 grams a day, and we discussed that in our earlier chapters. RDA is going to be 98%. The daily value for fiber is 11.5 grams per 1,000 kilocalories, and because our daily values in the back of our nutrition labels is based on a 2,000 kilocalorie diet, we can just multiply 11.5 times 2. We can do the same for the DRI for fiber, 14 grams times 2 for a 2,000 calorie diet, and there's no upper limit. Well, based on the previous slides, there seem to be downsides to over-consuming fibers, but generally, fiber is a good thing for healthy people. So here are some examples of fiber in different food items and different food groups. Whole grain products provide about 1 to 2 grams of fiber per serving. And examples of this can include 1 slice whole wheat, 1 ounce ready-to-eat cereal, and etc. Vegetables also provide fiber. Most vegetables contain about 2 to 3 grams of fiber per serving. For example, 1 cup of raw bean sprouts, half a cup of cooked broccoli, and a lot of other examples of vegetables, and half a cup of chopped raw carrots and peppers. Fruits also provide fiber. They have about 2 grams of fiber per serving. One medium apple, banana, kiwi, nectarine, orange, pear can provide that 2 grams, or half a cup of applesauce, blackberries, and other berries. Fruit juices contain very little fiber, so usually it's better to actually eat the fruit, the whole fruit. Legumes, many beans, have 6 to 8 grams of fiber per serving, so this has the most. So eat your beans. Half a cup of cooked baked beans, black beans, and other beans. Some legumes provide about 5 grams of fiber per serving. Half a cup of cooked garbanzo beans, and other examples.